Once upon a time, in a small, beautiful city located in the eastern part of Nigeria, lived a 10-year-old girl named Kainene. She was bright and spirited child, with eyes full of wonder and a heart filled with love. But despite her innocence, she was burdened by a heavy weight, the animosity of her own mother. Kainene's father, Felix, adored her with all his heart. He showered her with affection, praised her talents, and listened to her dreams with unwavering support. However, this love and attention only fueled her mother's resentment. Jane, a woman hardened by life's disappointments, could not bear to see her husband's affection diverted away from her, for she felt that her husband had transferred all the love he had for her to their daughter. She insisted that he no longer looked at her with the affection she used to see in his eyes. Rather, he has become too emotionally attached to their daughter, Kainene. As a result of this, she started unconsciously developing hatred towards her own daughter. She would flog her mercilessly at the slightest provocation and denied her of motherly love and affection. Felix, Kainene's father, was a very busy man. He usually traveled for weeks at a time. Therefore, he was rarely home. Hence, Kainene at a very young age was always left alone to fend for herself. Kainene, for some reason, started veering towards puberty at a very tender age. By the time she was 7, she had started to develop little breasts on her chest. And by the time she was 9, she experienced the first symbol of womanhood. The day her period came, she ran to her mother with fear. But Jane paid no attention to her. Instead, she dismissed her, called her a spoiled child, and accused her of stealing her husband's love and destroying their family. That day was the worst day of her life. She vowed never to tell her mother anything again or even talk to her. The little girl had no idea what to do. She went to school the next day. A teacher saw her blood-stained uniform and quickly cornered her. It was that teacher who taught her all she needed to know about menstruation and how to care for herself. Each day, Kainene tiptoed around the house, trying to avoid her mother's piercing glares and hurtful words. She sought solace in the arms of her father, who provided a sanctuary of love and understanding whenever he was around. Unfortunately for the two women, the family would suffer a big blow. Felix went to work one day and never came back. He was involved in a ghastly motor accident which took his life on the spot. His death broke his wife. She had finally lost everything and the one thing she loved most in life. For Felix came into her life at a time when she had no one. He had been always there for her, shielded her, supported her. She had no parents and siblings, but in him, she not only found a partner, she found a father, a brother, and a friend. She never wanted children because she felt a child would divide their love. So when Kainene came, she was devastated and depressed, and seeing the way Felix loved their daughter only made her jealous of the girl. She did not fail to show the girl her dislike when she could. Even as a little girl, Kainene understood that she was not going to see her daddy anymore. Her life had lost its meaning, but she had mastered the art of burying her grief. So once more, she buried her grief and recoiled into her shell. Her father's death caused a bigger rift between her and her mother. Jane now buried herself in her work and totally abandoned her daughter to fend for herself. She managed to prepare food and provide her basic needs, but there was no relationship between the mother and her daughter. And the poor girl could not comprehend why her mother hated her so much. In the same compound where Kainene and her mother lived, also lived Chike, who the whole neighbors usually called Uncle Chike, for he was in his late 40s, but had no wife or children. Whenever Jane was away from home, Uncle Chike would buy things for Kainene and offer comfort to her. He was respected in the compound, so Kainene, who had turned 11 at this time, saw no harm in what he was doing. He would sit with her and listen to her pour out her heart, and sometimes even assist her with her schoolwork. In no time, she began to feel comfortable around him. Finally, it was time for him to strike. All along, Uncle Chike only saw Kainene as another vulnerable little girl to prey on, and was waiting for her to fully trust him, then he would reveal his true self. One day, while Jane was away at work, he came to visit Kainene as usual, under the guise of helping her with her schoolwork. After her homework was done, he asked her to sit on his lap. This was quite uncomfortable for the little girl, but she obliged. He started to touch her hair as he said to her, "Kainene, do you know that I really care about you?" She had a strange feeling that something was off, but she nodded in affirmation. He asked again, "Has anyone ever told you that you're a beautiful girl?" She looked at him and burst into tears. "My daddy," she replied in tears. She began to cry uncontrollably. He tried to comfort her, touching every private part of her body. The girl became confused and afraid. "What are you doing, uncle?" she asked, perplexed. "Shh, just be quiet. I want to show you something. You will enjoy it, I promise you." "No, uncle, please, I beg you. Don't touch me." She knelt down, crying and begging. But Uncle Chike would not listen. He had gone far. His eyes no longer looked the same. As she looked into them, she knew she was already done for. Uncle Chike carried her and covered her mouth to stop her from screaming and alerting the neighbors. He threatened to kill her with a little knife, which he brought out of his pocket. Hearing this, she became calm, and he took her clothes and forcefully took away her innocence. The poor girl lay there crying while he forced himself on her. And afterwards, he gently cleaned her up with a towel and water to avoid her mother seeing any stain of blood. After all was done, he carried her in his arms like a baby and began to pet her. He promised to always be there for her and take care of her, and with a kiss to her forehead, he took her to the bedroom and lay her there. After he had gone, Kainene cried her eyes out, for even as young as she was, she knew that this was wrong, but it pained her the more because she had no one to talk to about it. She was in this state when her mother came home from work. That day at the office, Jane's friend and colleague Abigail had sat her down and talked to her about her relationship with her daughter. She made Jane to understand that Kainene was all that she had left in this world, and she was the only piece of Felix that was left with. Abigail talked for a long time, to the point that Jane began to shed tears. As Jane stood by her daughter's bed, looking down at her innocent form, she thought that perhaps Abigail was right. But the problem still remains that she had no idea how to love this child, or to even begin to show her love. They had no bond, and so many years had gone by. Still holding that thought, she went to her room to rest. But that night, she could not sleep. She tossed and turned all night. She made up her mind that night to become nicer to her daughter. The next morning, she got up earlier than usual and went straight into Kainene's room. Kainene looked up at her mother and wondered what she had committed this time around. Surprisingly, her mother walked to her bed and sat down for the first time since she could remember. When Jane looked into her daughter's eyes, they were ice cold. She knew that Kainene was afraid of her and probably disliked her, but what she saw in her eyes that morning was pure hatred and deep sadness. Jane hated herself for the way she had treated the girl and silently prayed in her heart that it was not too late. For Kainene, it was already too late. After what happened yesterday, the only feeling she had in her was hate, and she vowed not to speak to her mother ever again. After a fruitless attempt to talk to her daughter, Jane decided to leave her alone, but she promised herself to keep trying to make things right, no matter how long it would take. Uncle Chike continued to come to the house every day, except on the days Jane was home. And soon, the neighbors began to talk, and it soon got to Jane's ears. Jane confronted him, but he said he only visited to help her with her schoolwork. She confronted Kainene too, but the girl only confirmed what Uncle Chike had said earlier. Jane was not comfortable with this presence in her house, so she asked him to stop coming. Kainene had no friends in school. She always kept to herself, and the death of her father made it worse. She totally recoiled into her shell. The closest person to her in the whole world was Uncle Chike, and somehow she had begun to enjoy the other things he did to her. 2 days after her mother stopped Uncle Chike from visiting, Kainene was unable to concentrate. She needed to see him, and she wanted him to touch her. Kainene had become addicted to the things they did together, even though she was only 12 years old. When she could not hold it anymore, she began to sneak to his house every day. Days turned into months, and months turned into years, and Kainene grew into a beautiful teenager. But her shenanigans with Uncle Chike continued. She knew that what she was doing was wrong, but she could not stop. She had tried severally to stop, but she found herself going back every time. Jane, on the other hand, had no success with patching things up with her daughter. In fact, the more she tried, the more she was shut out, but she would not stop trying. After all, how hard could it be to deal with a 15-year-old? One day, Jane came home to meet her house in darkness. She thought about where Kainene could be, then she heard it. A cry of pain was coming out of the bathroom. She rushed in. It was Kainene, lying in the pool of her own blood and crying in severe pain. Jane ran and tried to ask her what was going on. All Kainene could say was, "It's Uncle Chike." Jane could not understand, but she knew that she needed to rush her to the hospital immediately. She tried to lift her up, but her weight was too much, so she ran out to get the neighbors to help her. When she reached the hospital, she was already unconscious as she had lost a lot of blood. After examination, the doctors tried to stop the bleeding, all to no avail. Her blood was pumping uncontrollably. 15 minutes after she was brought in, Kainene was confirmed dead. When Jane heard this, she nearly ran mad. The nurses had to tie her down. Finally, she had lost all. Few hours later, after she was stable, with her friend Abigail by her side, the doctor told her that after examination, it was discovered that Kainene just had an abortion, and apparently it was not the first time. But this time she was unlucky as the walls of her womb was ruptured in the process. Jane, in a fit of rage, ran home, straight to Uncle Chike's house. She confronted him, but he denied everything. She came out and started shouting until people gathered. She dragged him by the trouser and openly accused him of killing her daughter. At first, it was hard to believe, but after she told them her daughter's last words, coupled with the rumors circulating years ago, the young men did not wait. They started beating him mercilessly until he confessed all that he had done to Kainene. He told them how he started taking advantage of the girl since she was 11. He admitted to taking her to the small clinic for abortion 4 times. On hearing this, Jane collapsed and was rushed to the hospital. Uncle Chike was arrested and tried. He was found guilty for second-degree murder, child abuse, and sexual abuse, after which he was sentenced to life in prison. Finally, Jane woke up 2 days later, and as her friend Abigail once said to her, she found herself alone in the world. She hated herself, she hated her life. She wished she could die because she could not even face life anymore. She wished she had done things differently. She wished she had listened to her husband. But like they say, not all wishes come true. This is not a fairy tale. This is reality.